Okie dokie. We are live today, guys, and we got a good guest joining us. We're honored, and I'm honored to be able to have him sit with us today. This is Mr. Joseph Woodard. He is a Vietnam veteran. He supported CCC. He was with the 361st Attack Helicopter Company, better known as the Pink Panthers. And I'm not going to take up a lot of time trying to tell this awesome man's story. I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to him and let him get started. How are you doing today, Mr. Woody?
I'm doing great, bud. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. Guys, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to him. Go ahead, Mr. Woody.
Well, first of all, I'd like to give a little bit of background on myself, what my training was, and then we'll go and talk a little bit about the Pink Panthers, how they were formed, why they were formed, some of the missions that we were assigned to do, and then a little bit about some of the folks of the Pink Panthers. Myself, I was born and grew up in Kettering, Ohio, which is a suburb of Dayton, Ohio, in southwest Ohio. When I graduated from high school, I was 17 years old and moved to California to start college. Well, I started college, I got in a fraternity. By the time I was turned 18, I had about a 0.0 grade point average. So I knew I was going to be ripe and prime for the draft. So I went down and I saw this big sign in an Army recruiter's window. It said, you want to be a pilot? And I'd always wanted to be a pilot. So I said, sure. So I went in and the recruiter set me down and said, you want to be a helicopter pilot? And I wasn't really quite sure what that was, but it had the word pilot in it. So I was happy about that. Next thing I did is take a written test and then a flight physical. And the next thing I knew, I was on an airplane to Fort Polk, Louisiana. I was going through the basic training at Fort Polk, and I enlisted in what was called the Warrant Officer Flight Training, where they had a high school to flight school. And as a matter of fact, they still have the Warrant Officer Flight program at Ft.Rucker, Alabama, or now I think it's Fort Novus, Alabama. But so after basic training, they put us, the ones that were going to the Warrant Officer Flight Training school at Fort Walters, Texas. They put us on a bus and shipped us all there. And in Fort Walters, we went through our what's called pre-flight training, where they instilled a lot of the Army kind of stuff as far as fit shining your boots and setting up displays and learning the ground school aspects of the helicopter. After the pre-flight, which was about a month, we went into the flight training part of it. And this was just our primary, our early flight training, just how to maneuver the controls and fly the aircraft. Then after Fort Walters, Texas, we went to Ft.Rucker, Alabama, where we learned a little bit of instrument flying, and that's where we did our tactical flying. We got checked out in the AH-1 Huey, and we did a lot of survival and and flying low level, flying into landing zones, things like that. Well, after graduation from flight school, some of us got put into advanced helicopters. Some went to CH-47 training, CH-53 training, and I was had orders to go to Cobra transition. And the Cobra transition was at Fort Hunter Stewart in Savannah, Georgia. And that lasted, I think it was 4 to 6 weeks. And then I was en route to Vietnam. And I arrived in Vietnam with 4 of my classmates that also were being sent up to Camp Holloway, just outside of Pleiku. It's on the other side of town from Pleiku Air Force Base. And then from there, we were assigned to the 361st Pink Panthers. And so that's how I got started. I was there from May of 1970 to February of 1972. I was only 19 when I got there, so after my first tour, I wasn't old enough to drink or anything. But I thought, well, I'll just extend. Plus, I really enjoyed. I liked what I was doing. I was a pilot in command and an air mission commander for the Pink Panthers, and I was in the 2nd platoon. So my call sign was Panther 27. So that is basically how I got into the Army and got to play coup. Are there any questions about the early years like that? A lot of the pilots were young in those days because they had the high school to flight school program. So a lot of them, when they turned 18, they went ahead and joined the Army to fly. They would rather do that than be on the ground. At least have their choice.
While we're still getting viewers coming in, but while just speak while you're talking about how young y'all are, I think I'm gonna show some photos of a few photos of you of just how young you were. I mean, this is a great photo of you actually in the cockpit. You can still tell you guys were young. I mean,
Yeah, I don't even think I could grow a mustache yet back then.
hey, I'm still going through that issue right now. I can grow a beard, but that mustache is avoiding for some reason. How I know we're jumping ahead here, but how old do you think you were right here?
In that picture, I had probably just turned 20.
Yeah, and that's what and especially in Vietnam, I'm sure I know it was like that in the GWAT Global Volunteer, but it's just amazing that y'all are so young, and a viewer just said can't even not even old enough to buy a beer.
Yeah,
Exactly. There y'all are,
true that.
in $1 million machines, and I just find that so wild that young men doing such extraordinary things like that. It's amazing. Um, well, I know I had a question about Ft.Rucker, and I always forget to ask, or I may forget. You talked about that's where y'all ended up doing instruments, and did you say also tactical?
Right. We learned the tactics of flying into out of landing zones, flying in route, anything to do with going into combat. We learned right there at Ft.Rucker.
Okay, so that means I'm assuming going into combat means you're firing, you're shooting, you're finally learning instruments or gunnery, I should say.
A little bit of gunnery. I think we had 2 weeks of gunnery. Most of us got into the meat of gunnery when we were at Hunter Stewart and Savannah, when we were actually flying the Cobra. And so we were going to the ranges and stuff.
Did you feel that was I'm Jason, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Did you feel that 2 weeks, was it pretty in depth enough? Did you feel comfortable?
It happened. Well, it all happened so quick that, by the time where you actually learned is when you got to Vietnam. The training they were throwing so much at you that it was kind of hard to keep and absorb everything that was going on. So the actual learning of what we were doing happened in Vietnam.
Okay, T. We got our first question right here.
Okay.
Jason.
Well, I think the most nervous out of anything in flight school was the first day that you solo. It's the first day that they release you to go out by yourself without your instructor in it, and hopefully make it around the traffic pattern 3 times, safely. And once you did that, the edge kind of came off a little bit. It's when you started getting cocky. But that was probably the most nervous part.
I remember speaking to you because you were at Rucker, and then a few other gentlemen that were at Rucker, and I was asking similar to Jason's question about training, and he was talking about his most nervous was not necessarily, although he did mention the first uh solo flight. He mentioned when y'all all started first flying and these mass of trainees all leaving at once, and there just being a mass exodus of helicopters leaving, and him worried, somebody gonna get too heavy on the stick, or get too
Oh, you
close.
bet.
He was worried about that, but oh,
And on the mission that we actually flew in Vietnam, we didn't have that problem because we were doing, and we'll talk about that a little later, our tactics and stuff.
yeah,
Here's a question. How soon did you learn to auto-rotate the aircraft? It was in that first 9 or 10 hours when we were with an instructor that we actually started doing auto-rotations.
Can you would you care to explain a little bit? Because I actually still get confused on what exactly an auto rotate
Well, an
is.
auto-rotation is how you get the aircraft to the ground when you lose an engine. These are all single engine aircraft. So if you had an engine failure in flight, the only way to get to the ground was to auto-rotate. So therefore you had to down the collective right away. And what this did is take the pitch out of the blades, because the pitch would, the blades would be at an angle where they would actually stall out. If you didn't take the pitch out, where they would keep turning enough to get to the ground.
Wow, man, I bet that is a pucker factor inducing right there.
It is. Well, it's a pucker factor anytime, but especially when it's unexpected.
We've been working on his lighting. No, he is not Roddy. He is not hiding his identity. little joke. Roddy Patterson. His father was a early Project Omega recon man, and also right at the switch when Omega was absorbed by FOB2. So
okay. And plus, it's kind of, I'm probably sitting. It's kind of dark seeing me. I'm sure. So it's not on purpose.
Yeah, he's not doing any secret scroll missions or anything like that. So no. He's not excited. Yeah. I think if you'd like to go ahead and get your entrance on into in Vietnam, and first of all, actually, to go ahead and enter in, did you when you're being sent to Vietnam, did you know where you were going, or was this in Vietnam?
No, this was in Vietnam when we got orders to go to the different bases, and different pilots got sent wherever they were needed, and so we did not know at all, or I didn't know at all, where I would be headed to in Vietnam.
Here's one more question before if you want to enter.
Did you ever have an unexpected auto? Yeah, I sure did. Not in Vietnam, but after Vietnam, I had an engine failure and I had to auto rotate, but it was no problem. It was a big area. Was able to get it down and stuff. But after I left Vietnam, while I was at Fort Hood, Texas, I went through the instructor pilot school there. So I was doing auto rotation just about every day when I was giving check rides and training. And then that continued on the rest of my Army career, which was about 11, 12 years. I'd finally, they had sent me to Germany for 3 years, which I loved. And then I had orders to Fort Polk, Louisiana, back where I started. And I told them I tried to extend in Germany, and I told them if I was going to Fort Polk, I was going to get out of the Army. And they told me that I was voluntary indefinite, so I had to stay in a year. So a year to the day I got there, I got out of the Army. And in my last 34 years, I flew helicopters for 50 years. And my last 34 years was as an EMS pilot.
You'll definitely want to hear about that. You are definitely one of the most interesting men I've been lucky enough to have an acquaintance with. Uh,
I don't know about
so,
that.
well, I assure you, you are, sir. You are. So you, from my notes, are, and I think you said a minute ago, you actually land, you went through Hawaii and then Guam and then actually landed in Cameron.
Yes, I sure did. I sure did. So I can remember on the way over to Vietnam, we stopped in Hawaii, and everybody got off the plane, went into the airport, and a lot of folks went into the bar. And I tried to go in the bar, but they wouldn't let me in because I wasn't old enough to drink. So, but I think it paid off about 3 or 4 hours later when they were all hung over on the airplane, and I wasn't. So that was probably a blessing.
Here's a question.
Okay, when you left Vietnam, how many flight hours had you collected? I had collected a little over 1,000 combat hours, but the folks who flew the UH-1s and aircraft like that got a lot more. We were sent out on specific missions and went out and came straight back. We didn't fly a lot of resupply missions, things like that. That's why we were the Cobra pilots. Most of them didn't get quite as much time in country as the slick pilots, Huey pilots.
Yeah, if you go ahead and like to speak about getting into Vietnam and finding where you're going and all that, I think we're ready to get into Vietnam.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about first the history of the 361st.
Absolutely.
In the summer of 1967, Major Larry Akins was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas, at Gray Army Airfield, and he had gotten a notification from the Pentagon that summer of '67 that he was going to be the commanding officer of a new unit that was being formed with a specialized mission that was classified and top secret. So in the next, probably 5 or 6 months, he was able to form the company. He had gotten some commissioned officers and some warrant officers that had already had a tour in Vietnam. And this company was formed to perform missions somewhere in Southeast Asia. They didn't exactly specify Vietnam or Thailand or whatever, but so he had gotten these people together, and as of November 1st, 1967, the Pink Panthers were activated. And when they were first activated, it was at Fort Hood at Gray Army Airfield. They were assigned 12 UH-1C Huey gunships. And it's because the Bell helicopter was a little behind in the production of the Cobra, the H-1G. So they started off with Charlie model gunships. And they did about 4 months of training where they were trained in the tactics that they would be using is they would be escorting aircraft in and out of landing zones, hot and cold. And they would do it low level. Like I said, it was kind of a new tactic. But 4 months later, back in March and April, they went ahead and were en route to Vietnam. In the early days, they thought they were going to go to NKP in Thailand and support Air Force helicopters downing rescued pilots that were shot down over Laos. But they ended up in South Vietnam, where they initially had the Charlie model gunships, and they were initially down in, I think, 3 Corps. And they did several missions down there until June or July of 1968, where they went into the Cobra transition. And all the pilots, all the crew chiefs, and the maintenance personnel were transitioned into the AH-1G Huey Cobra. And from there, they moved north to Camp Holloway. It's in Pleiku, and that's where they were when I arrived. Prior to going on the FOB mission out of Holloway, they did missions around the local area. They did a lot of covering convoys. A lot of it was in the Mengyang Pass, and this was in the mountains between An Khe and Pleiku, where supplies would be coming over from Quy Nhon, which is along the coast. They would bring them across the highway and through the Mengyang Pass, and this was a perfect place to be ambushed because it was triple canopy jungle. They had, the bad guys could dig in and just lob mortars and rockets down upon the ground convoy. So they sent the Panthers out there to do convoy coverage, or hopefully they tried to stop any ambushes and stuff. And then from there, they got sent up to KONTUM to fly. They still lived at Camp Holloway, but every morning we would fly to KONTUM at FOB2 at CCC, land and get our morning briefing. From there, we would go up to Dak To and stand by, either to insert a team or extract a team. Or if there was a team in the field they thought might get in trouble, we went ahead and stood by at Dak To, because Dak To was our last place where we could land and refuel and rearm before going over the fence into Laos. At this time, you can remember the U.S. denied that there were ever any Americans in Laos. So we were on a mission, a top secret mission to support the teams that we put in. We had a cover story that we were in search of a downed C-123 out of Dak To en route to an unknown location in Thailand that had crashed. So if we were to get captured in Laos, that was supposedly our cover story. After we
to jump in, I hate to jump in. When you mentioned, I was showing their pictures of the Charlie models. When the Cobras you mentioned, they did begin to trickle in. What was the trickle in process? Was it very few numbers at first?
No, I think at first they were able to get all 12 of the aircraft in, I believe. I'm not positive. So I think they eventually transitioned strictly into Cobras.
Wow, amazing.
I know it was that way when I got there in May of 1970.
Wow.
So they did the FOB mission, and then they did that until the CCC kind of stood down and stuff in late 1971. And then they went back to Camp Holloway all the time, where they would fly in support of 2 Corps at different, fire bases, villages, things getting overrun. They were there to support them. And then the whole unit was dissolved in December of the summer of 1972. The 361st was disbanded. So that's kind of a little history of the unit, where they were and what was going on. Some of the people that we worked with, some of the aviation units, we worked with the 170th Bikinis, the Slicks out of KONTUM, and also the 57th Gladiators, who at one time was out of Pleiku and KONTUM. And I think they alternated the mission. I'm not sure at what interval, if it was 3 months, 6 months, or a year, but the 170th would do it, and then they would be pulled back from that mission, and the 57th would take over and do it for a certain amount of time. The Cobras, we stayed with FOB the whole time with CCC until the end, and then we had a good rapport with the Slicks, the UH-1s, the Bikinis, and the Gladiators. One thing that we noticed is all the pilots, the crew chiefs, and mechanics from both units, the 170th and 57th, And also the team members of the different SOG teams, they all walk funny because they had big brass balls. I mean, these guys, if anything happened to us, they would be on the ground immediately to get us out. If a team got in trouble, nothing would stop them from going in and getting the team out. The way we operated was the Cobras actually led the missions out into the area of operations, which was Laos, southern Laos. And the area that we worked in was probably the most dangerous part of southern Laos. We worked in areas that some people might be familiar with, the Bra, Hotel 9, Juliet 9. These places were high in activity of anti-aircraft. We had everything from small arms shot at us to 50 caliber, 12.7 millimeter, 37 millimeter, and 57 millimeter anti-aircraft. We actually had aircraft take airburst. And I have some pictures of that, but I was trying to find and send you, but I couldn't. One of them got hit by a 37. Our CO was in the front seat. And they were able to make it back to Dak To. They had hundreds of shrapnel holes inside of the aircraft. But Major Goins was our commanding officer then. I get into a few war stories. He was kind of known as what we called a bullet ass. Means or a bullet magnet. It's probably a better term. But he got hit by the 37. He was with Terry Crump as the pilot in the back seat. He was in the front seat flying co-pilot. He was flying with me one day, and we got hit in the hydraulics. We lost one of our hydraulics systems and had to make a running landing back at one of the stage fields or one of the fire bases. And then eventually he was in the front seat with Nate Van Kuren, and they were protecting a village that was being overrun. You know, they had the bad guys had already gotten into some of the buildings in this village. It was in the Idrang Valley. It was south of Pleiku. And they were coming in and they engaged a 50 caliber that was on the edge of the village in one of the hooches. And the bullet came through the front of the Cobra, went through Major Goins' jaw and out the back of his helmet. And miraculously, he survived. Nate flew him directly to the 71st AHC hospital in Pleiku, and he was shipped out of there back to the States to recuperate. Unfortunately, he passed away in the late 90s. Major Goins did. Airburst like ACAC. It was similar to that, only we didn't get a lot of rounds at a time. You know, you might get 1 or 2 rounds that would go off. These were all, I think, altitude. It went off at altitude, not necessarily when it hit you. And then you could see them go off below you and above you, but we didn't get all that many of those kind of rounds. Most of our rounds were 23 millimeter or less, and they looked like softballs coming at you. I mean, just bright red softballs on fire. You know, they go above you and below you, and you couldn't understand why they hadn't hit you, but we were glad they didn't. And after a while, you just get used to it. But I'll talk a little bit here about the actual Cobra itself, the AH-1G. It was an aerial weapons platform designed especially for aerial gunnery. And it was the first of its type that was developed. The Army used them and the Marines used them. They were very narrow silhouette, as you can see in that picture, which allowed them to go a little bit faster. They had less drag and carry strictly armament. We didn't pick up troops or anything. They said in tandem, the crew did. The front seater was the co-pilot gunner who fired the turret, and the back seater was the pilot who fired the rockets. Now, the aircraft were configured in different ways for different units around Vietnam. You know, each unit had a specific mission that they might have a different need for how the aircraft was configured. When I got there, well, the front seat, let's go back to what he did. He had a flex turret in the front seat, and the turret actually flexed left and right and up and down. So he would fire the minigun and the 40 millimeter, the way it was set up in our unit. Some units were set up where they had a dual minigun in the front, or they had a dual 40 millimeter meter in the front. And some units had, like ours, we had one minigun, 140 millimeter. And on the wing stores there, you can see in this picture, I can't see it very well, they had a couple minigun pods and a couple rocket pods. The way we flew ours, though, we had the inboard pods had 19-shot rocket pods, one on one side, one on the other side of the inboard. The outboard had 7-shot rocket pods, one on the inboard, one on the left side, one on the right side. And the reason we were configured like that is because of the weight. We were in the mountains. We had a high density altitude, so it's kind of hard to get off the ground and stuff. And plus, flying out into RAO, we needed more fuel. So there was more of a fuel ammunition trade-off. So we carried more fuel, so we had to carry less ammunition in order to get into our AO and then to have some station time. You know, time where we could circle around, find out where the bad guys were coming at the teams and where we needed to fire. The Cobra itself, like I said, ours had a 7.62 millimeter minigun in the turret. It actually fired 4,000 rounds per minute. And that was on the right side. And on the left side, we had the 40 millimeter grenade launcher, which carried, or which shot 300 grenades per minute. And then we had our wing stores. Our inboard pods were 19-shot pods. So that was 38 rockets. And our outboard pods were 7-shot pods. So that was another 14 rockets. Now, in the rockets, we carried different types of warheads. They had a 10-pound warhead, a 17-pound warhead. They had a flechette warhead, which each flechette had 2,200 nails in each warhead. And we use those mainly like to prep a landing zone, only because unlike an HE rocket, a high explosive rocket, the bad guys didn't know exactly where we were coming in, except for the sound of the helicopter, of course. But we could prep it with a flechette and it'd be silent. They called it silent death. Once the nails would actually go off when it decelerated in front of the aircraft.
I've got lucky enough, thank goodness, and it's one of my most cherished items. And in fact, it's in a plastic baseball protector because I cherish it so much. Mr. Woody sent me his business card, which I believe I shared and showed y'all yesterday to let y'all know about the show. And he was so kind enough to send me an actual flechette out of one of his rocket pods. And like he said, I can't imagine those bad boys coming out of him. It could literally nail you to a tree if you were close enough to a tree when it hit. I mean,
you bet.
Wow.
You betcha. And we also carried some aircraft carried Willie Peep for marking rounds, but we didn't use that very often. Also, later in the war, we got the 20 millimeters, which were mounted on the left indoor wing store of the Cobras. And the early models had a few surprises for you. The ones that hadn't shot it before. They'd go out and they'd pull the trigger, and it had so much vibration that the front seat or co-pilot's door would fly open while you're in flight. The ammunition bay door on the left side would pop open, and then the SAS, the stability system in the Cobra, would click off. So it was kind of a surprise. But later on, they went ahead and beefed up the front door so it wouldn't come open. They beefed up the ammo door and beefed up the SAS system a little bit where it didn't kick off every time you fired it. But we really liked the 20 millimeter because it was good for close in support, and like the minigun, we didn't really need to use the flex sight in the front because it's shooting at 4,000 rounds a minute. You could just move the tracers wherever you wanted them. So you could get in closer to the ground units and closer to the slicks. The tactics that we used, we were talking about the Cobras were leading the mission. They would fly out to the area of operations and then meet up with a covey, which was an Air Force FAC, which was either an O2 or an OV-10 at that time. And then they'd have a covey rider in it, which is one of the special forces guys like John Plaster, Plastic Man. We would talk to on the radio, and they would hand us off to the folks on the ground. They would let us know where they were. The guys on the ground would either pop a smoke or a panel that we could see. In my 20 months, I can't remember ever having a cold extraction. I mean, this is getting the guy out. They were always like eight of the teams, or 8 members of the team normally at that range, would always somehow get into a firefight. The bad guys would find them, and there would be hundreds of bad guys finding them and stuff, and a lot of them would be surrounded, and they'd say they got the bad guys right where they want them. And they would call us in to do the air support, to try to break the contract that they had, things like that, so they could move to a safer area to be extracted, which that didn't happen a whole lot. And a lot of the landing zones, as you can see in that picture, there's triple canopy jungle in the mountains. A lot of our extractions were by string, using the McGuire rig or ladders. They could come to a low enough hover. But a lot of the landing zone, they blew trees up with claymores prior to us getting there, where they could drop the strings down through to hook up and be pulled out. And that's kind of a view down. You can see the jungle scene down through it and things like that. It was hard. But the Huey pilots, I'll tell you what, I have more respect, so much respect for them. If we ever got in trouble, they would be right in there. And one of the examples was the 57th Assault Helicopter Company, or the 57th Gladiators. We were coming back from mission one day in Laos, and I had 4 Cobras, and I think there were 4 slicks. And I was on short final in the Dak To, and the lead Gladiator called me and said, 27, your Chalk 4 just crashed. So I immediately took off and went around the circle. And by the time I got around back to where he had crashed, Steamer was the pilot, Steambach was the pilot, we called him Steamer, had started cutting down the trees with his rotor blades to get down into the crew, because the Cobra was laying on its side and it was on fire. And so Steamer was able to cut down through the bamboo with his rotor blades. His crew was able to get out and go and rescue the pilots. One of the pilots was John Cole, who I went through flight school with. He was unconscious. I think he had a broken back, and I think the plexiglass was also starting to melt into his neck and back. And then the other pilot was Vince Sullivan, and he was more stunned than anything else. But fortunately, the crew from the slick were able to get him out before the aircraft exploded. And as soon as we got back into Dak To, Steamer had landed, and they put John out on the runway, and they wanted somebody that knew him to come and talk to him, try to keep him out of shock. Well, I went through flight school with him, and we was one of the guys that came in country with me. So that's the first time I'd ever seen anybody with their eyes rolled up behind their head. And of course, he was unresponsive. He was already in shock, and so they loaded him up. Another Huey went and refueled, and they loaded him up on this slick, sent him back to Pleiku to the 71st AHC hospital, where he was evac out of there as soon as he got initial treatment, and then back to the States, where we got rehabbed. Initially, they told him he'd never fly again, but a few years later, he was flying again and still in the Army. So that was a really miraculous thing. Another time using the 170th of bikinis had, and this is an Operation Tailwind. We went in to do a medevac mission, and RCO Major Goins, or not Major Goins, Major Henry at that time, and Bob Lewinsky, the pilot in command in the back seat, had been shot down when they first went down to set up a gun pattern to bring the Huey in to get some medevac some people out. And Mike Wilson, one of the 170th pilots, came in and under heavy fire and rescued RCO and Bob Lewinsky. So there was nothing that these guys would do. I've seen them setting in landing zones or hovering, and they were actually having some of the controls shut out from under them, and they just sat there. It was really amazing. These guys, we know we owe our lives to them also. And then our normal mission, though, we would go out in the AO. The Cobras would go down on the trees first. We flew them right on the trees. We'd take 2 light fire teams, and we'd have 1 light fire team hold high while the other light fire team flew low on the trees, set up a racetrack type gun pattern that the Hueys were being vectored by one of their guys, say it was a bikini. They'd have a high aircraft that would vector them in to our gun pattern and into where the landing zone was. They'd let them know how far away they were, and they would let them know when to start decelerating and when they were over the team. And they could always tell they were over the team because normally the Cobra that was in front of them would break right over the team. So it gave them an idea where the team was. And then by the time the Cobra was breaking to go outbound, the other Cobra was breaking to come inbound to covering, to put rockets around him, a minigun, 40 millimeter, whatever we needed to do to keep the bad guys' heads down. So we worked real close, became real close with the slick pilots and their crews.
I mean, that's amazing the way y'all constantly got one always coming in and keeping
Or you
fire.
bet.
It's amazing. I know I was about to ask you something about that specific thing. It was actually let's go. Let's take it before I ask my questions. I've done all this extra stuff. Let's take a question.
It did. Normally, it consisted of 2 Cobra helicopters, and what it is we had 3 platoons in the Panthers. And the first and 2 platoons would go to our north mission, which was out of Dak To into Laos. And our third platoon at that particular day would be stationed out of Duco and fly with the King Bees, the AH-34 aircraft, and the Vietnamese Rangers and teams that we would put into Cambodia. We didn't use American helicopters at that time to put teams in Cambodia. We used the H-34s piloted by the Vietnamese pilots. So the way we'd operate is first we had the primary fire team and the secondary fire team up north. The primary fire team would be responsible for the missions that day. The secondary teams would be the high aircraft. The next day would actually become the primary team. And then the team that was in Duco would come up and be the secondary team. And the reason we did that is because, the secondary team would then know where the teams were and what their situation was as far as with the bad guys and stuff. And they also get a little heads up sometimes on where the teams were going to go in the next few days. As far as how many were in a platoon, we had 4 Cobras per platoon. We had 3 platoons. We had 12 Cobras total. And we had 1 UH-1, which we used as a maintenance slick. So if we were to go down in country into a place that was relatively secure, the maintenance team would come in. they would rig the aircraft up so a Chinook CH-47 could come in, lift the aircraft out of wherever they were, and take it back to Pleiku, to Camp Holloway, to be repaired, if it could be repaired. All right, how many hours were you flying a week usually? It varied. If it was during the monsoons and the weather was bad, we were pretty much stuck on the ground at Camp Holloway. Although we flew in bad weather. That was not something that we didn't do. We had bad weather one day. Well, we had our maintenance officer and our safety officer both took a crew chief with them down to Longtao to pick up new aircraft. And they were flying in the aircraft back. They were actually on top of the clouds and were heading back into Pleiku, and they got around to Mangyang Pass. And apparently the wingman, which was our safety officer, saw a hole in the cloud. So he was going to go down below, which was a big mistake because he ran into the side of a mountain. Well, the lead Cobra, which is a maintenance officer, didn't know at that time that he had crashed. He just lost communications with him. He made it back into Pleiku, and they launched a fire team, a light fire team, out to try to find if they could see where the aircraft was, because if it was still on fire or something like that, you would give away its position pretty easily. But they couldn't make it through the pass. It was getting in the evening. The clouds were down pretty low, and the first fire team had to turn back. So they called myself and my wingman, who are on standby back at Camp Holloway. They asked if we would launch. I said, sure. You have folks out there. You're going to go out there. You're going to get out there. So unfortunately, it had turned dark at that time, and we had gotten up into the pass. It was raining. We had a hard time seeing. We were just trying to make it through the pass to try to break out over An-Khe and go from there, because that was the side of the mountain that we thought that he might have crashed on. But I had a compressor stall right in the middle of the pass, and this is at night. It was dark as can be, and the front of the aircraft tried to swap ends with the back of the aircraft. It wasn't getting enough air from the amount of power that we pulled in the aircraft or in the engine. So we had to roll the throttle off. We actually entered auto rotation at night in the pass, which was not a pleasant feeling. But fortunately, as we started coming down, I started bring the throttle back in slowly, and it stopped the compressor stalls. And we broke out on the other side of Mangyang Pass. My wingman broke out first, Dana Jandro, and went down and landed at somewhere in An-Khe. And he set up a landing zone for me. We put his landing light on, and I was able to make it in. We spent the night there at An-Khe. Never found the aircraft that night that we were looking for. And they came in and rigged the aircraft up. I flew back on the maintenance Huey, which seemed like I did quite a bit. And they were sling loading the Cobra back to Pleiku, where I went back and got in another aircraft and went back out again, the next morning. They finally found the aircraft. Both crew members, the safety officer and the crew chief, were killed when they hit the side of the mountain, but they were actually a little farther south along that mountain range than we thought. But so it wasn't anything they could do for those folks. Unfortunately, even if we'd have found them, we couldn't have done anything for them. So that was just some of the things that while we were flying and stuff, like the weather type, like.
Here's actually a weather question we got right here.
Well, actually, that's a good question. It's really a tough question, because as long as we had any visibility and stuff, we would try to fly. I mean, and one of the folks that you're going to interview, I think, here pretty soon is Howard Sugar. And when he haloed in, I'm not going to give away any of that stuff. That's his story. But but the weather was terrible for us to try to get out there to get them out because they had made contact, they'd been in contact, and they needed to be extracted. But we waited that whole day almost before we decided we were going to go out and that we could make it out there. And as it was, we met up with the covey over at Duco, and they were in the Idrang Valley north of Duco, I believe. And there was a little rabbit hole. The covey went down in it, and we followed them down. I had 3 Cobras with me. So we were able to fire and make sure the team got together, and we called for the slicks to launch. They came out, and they were able to get them out, no problem. But Howard will tell you that whole story when you interview them.
You've been on some very interesting, or at least in the periphery, if not directly involved. It's interesting.
Oh yeah, we had in some of our big operations, were like Firebase 5 and Firebase 6. We were in support of them when they were getting overrun. The Easter Offensive, 1972, and then the big one we were on that we helped support was Tailwind, and that was into part of our area of operations. It was in the northern part.
Would you mind speaking a little bit about what some of y'all's responsibilities during Tailwind? Because the Marines, there's a new Marine book out literally titled Operation Tailwind. Kind of
Right.
covers
Here's a copy of that book.
Yep. Mr. Baird. Yep. And I'm trying to get him to come on as well.
Well, that would be great.
It's a wonderful book.
It's a great book. It's the best book that I've read on Operation Tailwind. As far as it's from the aviator's point of view, where most of them are from the ground, which it should be,
But he actually does a good job of getting some of the groundmen their point of view, which I some of that is some really good insight from the ground from
you bet. So, you bet. Now, if you can see that Cobra sitting there on fire in the picture there, I was sitting it was hit by a mortar, and the reason that we were getting hit is because we had so many aircraft on the ground at Dak To. At one time, we had the CH-53s from the Marines. We had, I think, 6 Cobras from the Marines sitting on the airfield. We had 6 Cobras sitting on the airfield, and we had some Hueys sitting there. And so we were prime target for to be hit from Rocket Ridge. And I was sitting about 15 yards inside the wire or from that Cobra when it got hit. And I was sitting getting a suntan on top of a bunker. Didn't have my shirt on. So it was really a surprise. And in that picture, you could see a person crawling in the ditch. That was Pete Gotch. He was the pilot of that aircraft who had went out there. And then he heard the mortar come out, I think, and head for that ditch there in front when it hit it. So our aircraft actually got some shrapnel in the tail boom and the blades from that rocket. We had all went into a bunker like for a minute, and when between rounds hitting, we went running out to our aircraft. And once we got off the ground and flew up toward the ridge, they stopped firing because they knew that once we'd spot them if they were continued firing. They crawled back in their foxholes or caves or whatever they were in up there, and ceased firing. So that kind of put a stop to that day. An abrupt stop. But our mission on Tailwind was just to be as support. We did some medevac. We did that medevac mission with the bikinis that we weren't able to complete because of the I guess amount of fire and getting shot down and stuff. But the Marines had the primary aviation mission. They flew the CH-53s, and they did the insertions and the final extraction, and they had the 6 Cobras they used to support their folks. So they had the primary part of the whole part almost of that whole mission. But I can remember the last day of Tailwind when they were extracting the aircraft. The last CH-53, I believe, got hit by a B-40 or something, and it lost his engine in the landing zone. He was able to I think that picture's backwards. He was able to, there it is. He was able to get out, and he lost his second engine south of the takeoff zone of the extraction point, and he did a magnificent job. That pilot, I don't know how he did it. He had to auto rotate that big CH-53 in the mountains all the way down where he landed next to the river right there, and that's actually the 53 on fire. And it didn't catch on fire when he set it down. He did a great job. They had another 53 come in. They got everybody out safely, I think. I don't know if there may have been some bumps and bruises, and I don't know if they lost. I don't think they lost anybody on it, but he did a great job. So after they pulled everybody out, my aircraft was cleared in to blow it up. It's kind of fun. We didn't get to do that very often. So we rolled in. I was flying with Captain Brian Sweet, and I was in his front seat. So I got to fire the turret, the 40 millimeter and the grenades, or 40 millimeter grenades and the minigun, and he fired the rockets in there, and we got it on fire, and it burned.
I mean, I had been telling the viewers and teasing them a little bit about having you on, and they've been referencing these photos for forever, and this is actually the first time I've ever shown these photos since you've given them to me.
Yeah, I took the pictures, and those are the only pictures I know of that incident.
It is, and guys, if y'all buy the book or if you read Hilt's Tailwind book, you'll remember they'll speak about the crash, and they unload everybody wounded and take up defensive position. And this is probably after the other aircraft has gotten them, and I would assume Mr. Woody and them are about to get ready to rocket it, because you can see it's up in flames pretty good here, and we can't see any defensive perimeter set, or so I would imagine.
They were already
out
when we did that. They were already out.
Okay, so yeah, they had already booked it out, dutied on out
team members
to get home. And
but like I said, I can't that pilot, and he did a remarkable job.
It's a wonder. It's a wonder they didn't lose anybody on that. You're absolutely correct.
I know.
And that's the before shot right there, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Get it literally as we're getting ready to do the business and to make sure the NBA can get in.
You betcha.
These are historic photos right here, which I thank you for sharing those.
Okay, that picture he had before then was one of our trips to Bangkok.
Was this actually after Tailwind?
That was on a boat.
I mean, was this after Tailwind, or was this before Tailwind?
Well, this is after Tailwind. This was probably 6 months to a year after Tailwind.
Okay.
But,
wow.
But we were on a boat, and that's Lynn Moss on there, and Philip Woody, the other Woody on there, and my best friend on the left there was up top, to the left, the other way. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's Lash Weiser. He was Panther 3-7. He was my best friend over there. He extended the same time I did to stay with the unit.
Isn't that you right here?
That's me right there.
Yeah, that would be you.
I was all of 20 years old then.
All 20, but when in Bangkok and get with the recon, then age doesn't apply. You get
no. Those guys, I don't know how they did it. They on the ground by themselves had there'd be an 8-man team against hundreds of bad guys would be after them. But their mission was to go in and get intelligence on what was going up and down the Ho Chi Minh Trail and on the roads into Vietnam. Like the road that was along the Bra, and then get out. bring the intelligence out. A few of their missions was I don't know if you want those pictures shown or not, but
I'm not going any further than that. I'm leaving it just at
this is
that right there. That's actually you right there.
that's myself on the left. I could grow a mustache then, so I must have just funny. And that's Ed Blackburn, Panther 17 on the right. We were just on top of one of the hoochies and doing whatever, drinking beer, enjoying ourselves, relaxing. But
yeah,
so that's
and Bangkok is fun. This would be the main to ask about Bangkok. We can't speak on it, but that would be the main to ask.
Bangkok, great. I was like our company ambassador to Bangkok. I made so many trips. I spent 45 days of my 30-day extension leave in Bangkok. Yeah, then there was that. But someone else I'd like to talk about before we end this is Bill Reeder. He was one of our pilots, and he wrote a book. It's a great book. If anybody wants to know anything about survivability and stuff, and how much the human body can take, it's this book, Through the Valley, My Captivity in Vietnam. And Bill was flying. He was one of our platoon leaders, and he was flying a Cobra gunship. It was kind of, I think he was captured in the first part of May of 1972. But he was flying between Dak To and Ben Het when he got shot down. I think he was going to be supporting the American advisor at Ben Het, because we didn't have a lot of Americans left back there in that area. We had a lot of American advisors. And Bill was shot down in that area, and his front seater was killed. Bill had a broken back and all kinds of injuries. Managed to get out of the aircraft, and he managed to escape and evade for a day or two until he was finally captured by the North Vietnamese. And this book tells what led up to him being shot down. It tells a little bit of his history. He flew fixed wing his first tour, OV-1 Mohawks, and he was also shot down. And it tells about what he endured going up with all these injuries, being taken from South Vietnam up the Ho Chi Minh Trail into captivity at the where he was finally put in the Hanoi Hilton in North Vietnam, the infamous Hanoi Hilton. And Bill's a good friend of mine. I see him every year. We have a Vietnam helicopter pilot reunion every year, and I see him there, and we talk every so often, but not very often. But I'll see him probably, it looks like in July. We have a Vietnam helicopter pilot reunion. This year is in San Antonio, Texas. So if there's any CCC guys or anything around San Antonio, Texas, between July 2nd and July 5th, stop by the Marriott Riverwalk Center, Marriott Hotel, and come to the Pink Panther Suite, and we'll buy you a beer or two.
I'll definitely be sharing it on the group page, and there's quite a few Texas gentlemen from CCC that live there.
It would be great. It would be great to see them. I think the last time we were there, we had a big group of guys from CCC. We had John Plaster. I think Toby was down there, and I think Joe was down there.
I believe so.
But we had a good get together, sit around telling war stories. And I know John Plaster told a couple of war stories. My kids were there; they were teenagers, and they're not quite teenagers. And he embellished a little bit on war stories that I was in. It's kind of fun. But
I can only imagine. I got to go to SOAR, but I can only imagine what it's like when the air crews and the recon and get to reunite. I bet y'all have.
Oh, it was great. We formed a real close bond. So it was nice. Matter of fact, we were talking about Philip Wood. When he got back from Vietnam, he actually went to my parents. He was from Indiana. He went over to my parents' house, in Ohio and let him know that I was okay and everything. And I think spent the night there. And then when I came back, eventually came back from Vietnam, he came over and visited, and we went out and raised a little hell in some of the bars in Dayton. But we had a good time, and like I said, we got real close with these guys.
I was always I always enjoy hearing about y'all. And especially, it seems like the Pink Panthers and the Army 219th, the SPAF guys, y'all really y'all are more or less the CCC dedicated air crew, so to speak. I mean, there were
Right.
the Gladiators and all that, but it seems like Pink Panthers, since y'all were right there at Play 2, and then the actual 219th guys stayed at the CCC compound for a while until headquarters thought they'd become too rogue, so to speak, and hanging out with solid guys too much. So I always love hearing about y'all getting to hang out with Recon and catching with y'all.
You bet.
All that.
Tell you what, it was a great mission. What I consider to be the best mission in Vietnam, and for us the most rewarding. Seeing teams go in, getting the intelligence, and getting the teams out. It's never a dull moment. I'll tell you that.
I can imagine. I mean, the Howard Sugar. That's why I'll be excited to get them on here to tell that one because that's a historic one. Not only of y'all getting them out, how
You bet that was the last Halo mission in Vietnam.
Yes, sir. That's what's amazing. Not only y'all getting them off the ground from that is historic because they were in bad doo doo, but also it being the last combat Halo jump of the Vietnam. Just amazing. Here's a question from Roddy.
Okay, what years were you in Pleiku? I was in Pleiku from May of 1970 till February of 1972.
I mean, you were, as a matter of fact, you were pretty much the last group of Panthers, weren't you? Weren't they pretty much done in 72?
Well, in early 72, or toward April and May, they had the Easter offensive, and Bill was shot down around that time. Like I said, get that book because it's a remarkable story. It's amazing that he's still alive.
I'm gonna link that a link to Amazon and another book site in the show notes so people can grab it. I gotta thank you for letting me borrow your copy to read.
Oh, no problem.
I've got my own copy as well since then.
Oh, great.
I'll end up reading it obviously as well. Again, it's one of those type books.
Yeah, but the unit stood down in the summer of 1972. They were dissolved, and they were no longer needed after the end of 71. CCC had stood down. Our mission with them had gone away, so we stuck around for a few months, 6 months after that, and then we're dissolved.
Military Marauders question about air.
Okay, I don't know if this was covered, but flying close air the way you guys were, did you notice any quirks with the aircraft when you were pushing it to the limit? No, it's just that we really had to be on our toes at all times. I mean, we were flying like a foot above the trees, 2 foot above the trees. And some of the things we had to watch out for is when we were firing is that there wasn't a bigger tree in front of us somewhere where the rocket would go off. And that's happened a few times where we actually flew through our own shrapnel. And that wasn't any fun. How is flying in country versus flying over? How different? Well, the big difference for us is we were an attack helicopter. And in Laos, we knew where the friendlies were. We knew where the friendly teams were because we put them in. So the rest of the area was pretty much free fire. Where when we were in Vietnam itself, you always had to get clearance from someone if you were going to be firing and stuff. To know if there were any friendlies around or if we were even allowed to fire. So that was the big difference, is that Laos was mainly free fire. Matter of fact, the last time I got shot up was in late 1971, we had still continued to work with folks that were doing recon out over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And by people, I mean O2s and OV-10s, Air Force, with the old advisors from, a lot of them were from the Special Forces. And we would trail them down at altitude, down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and they would show us where there was truck parks. And the trucks were parked up in the triple canopy jungle, where they would be mostly during the daytime, and at night they would continue on down the trail. So if they found one of these truck parks, they would mark it, and we would roll in on it and try to blow up whatever was there. But I was chock full. We had 4 Cobras that day, and we had 2 Hueys that flew chase ships in case we got shot down. And on the way back in, we were just about expended, but I had some rockets left. And since I was chock full, I was back there by myself. I rolled in on a river in Laos just to show my front seater. He was fairly new in country. And as soon as I rolled in and put a couple of rockets down along that river, it lit up like the 4th of July. We started getting bullets all around us and hitting us. And we had one that hit us in the collective that came up through the wiring. It came up through one of the controls and through the wiring harness down there for some of the radios and stuff. And so we lost one of the radios, but I had unplugged to kind of look around because the Cobra was so narrow in there, kind of look around to see if there's any other damage. And I could hear my front seater, my co-pilot, yelling that because I give him the controls while I got up to look around. Or not really get up, just to move around a little bit. But I had to take my helmet off in order to do anything. And they started yelling that the controls were frozen, the collective was frozen. So I went, oh, this can't be good. So I turned around, buckled back in, and plugged back in. And sure enough, what had happened is some of the metal from the control rod had come up through the wiring bundle, and it was catching it, and it caught it. And we didn't know that at the time. We just thought, and we didn't want to move it too much because we were afraid that it would come apart. And if your collective control rod comes apart, then you're basically dead. So we went, and as soon as I was able to get out on UHF radio, where I talked to everybody. Normally we talked internally on VHF. The Hueys broke off. They were in front of us on that, and they broke off, came around behind me. The other Cobras came around behind me and just escorted me back into October. I did a running landing. But I think that was the last time that I'd taken any rounds in Vietnam that I can remember.
And were those 37s or 51s?
No, those were just all small arms. They were all AK-47. I'd stupidly gotten low enough where, under 1,500 feet where I could be hit by them. I should have stayed higher, but, I'd already been there about 19 months at the time. And, we're kind of bulletproof, but it wasn't really true.
It only takes one well placed. I mean, people don't think about it, but
that's it. You can take 50. You can take 50 rounds, or you can take 1 round, and that 1 round will take you down. And the other, there went. You guys still there?
Yes, sir. We're here.
Sorry,
it's fine. I had a little roll off the table.
Pat just went. I must have got excited or something here. Can you guys see me okay?
We can't see you, but we can still hear you.
Okay, let me okay. How about now?
There you go. Yep, we got you. Coming through.
I'll put you on another stand over here. So there we go. I know it's kind of dark in the background, but
it's fine.
Hey, there.
Funny comment. It's that one round hitting the iPhone, taking it out. Yeah, it speaking of perfect round, that one little touch will get it. Miller Marauder was wanting to know, besides y'all getting suntan and what else would y'all get to do in on y'all
Well,
downtime?
a lot of times we would, especially if we were in KONTUM just waiting to go up to Docto, we'd play hearts and spades in the club, and where wherever they would put us to work, it stand by. So we did play a lot of cards. Uh, we didn't have any TVs to watch or radios to listen to, so it wasn't a whole lot to do. A lot of times we'd just take naps.
Heck yeah, uh, your lighting's actually better now than it was before. Pretty
Yeah,
funny. Pretty cool.
I should have dropped it on the floor before.
Um, we've like I said, I've got I'm gonna link Colonel Reader's book in. Is there anything else you like to cover while we've got you?
No, I think
Would you mind covering a little bit about your EMS work? Some folks were curious about
oh,
that.
yeah, not at all. I flew EMS for 34 years. I started off with a company called Metro Aviation, and at the time we were really small. There was only about 4, maybe 5 pilots, and we had different. We grew to the point where when I retired, 34 years later, we had over 500 pilots. We had between 500 and 600 pilots, and we had uh, programs all over the United States. And mainly they were all hospital based, and we would supply the aircraft, the maintenance, Part 135 certificate. The hospital would have the nurses and the paramedics that flew with us. Uh, Myself personally, I was started off at Shreveport, which is a home base for Metro Aviation at Shumpert Hospital, and then I flew when we opened up the Tyler program. I was sent over to Tyler, and then when you took over a program in Las Vegas in 1990, I flew out to Las Vegas and to help take over that program. Ended up back in Tyler, then back over in Melbourne, Florida, and flew in Melbourne for 13 years for our first flight. After that, I went back to Tyler, and I got cancer, so I got grounded because of the surgery and the chemo. And I went ahead and went to the main office in Shreveport, where I became an instructor pilot and a check airman. And we had full motion simulators, so I could give check rides, in the simulator, their annual check rides, without having to have a current medical. So that it worked out real fine for me, and I did that for about 18 months.
Wow. Were these like? I mean, I am familiar with, of course, first flights and of course terrible accidents where they've got to
Oh,
get
you
the
bet.
helicopter.
We landed right at the accident scenes. To be
Okay,
night
that's what I
night and
was.
day, night and day. It didn't matter where it was. The fire departments or volunteer fire departments also would set up landing zones for us. We'd have communications with them. Uh, the last, since about 2005, we had night vision goggles, so it made the nighttime flying a lot safer.
Wow.
And the last helicopters I flew, probably the last 10 years, they were fully instrumented, had autopilots. You could fly IFR, you could shoot instrument approaches just like an airliner.
Wow.
So they really came a long way.
Someone is we both lost our fathers at 89. He was asking about the cancer. I would assume it might be 89. I don't know.
Okay, the Agent Orange, we were probably we were all exposed to Agent Orange. The type of cancer that I had was colorectal, and it was not associated with Agent Orange yet. But I did get diabetes, diabetic retinopathy, neuropathy, and all those kind of things that they did associate with Agent Orange.
special in your life. That is absolutely textbook.
Because we were at fire bases. You know, we were like Doc Toe, we were out in nowhere, and they used it to defoliate the area around there, so there wasn't any trees or anything, you know, for the bad guys to hide in.
Here's a question. That's interesting.
That says something about flying under bridges. No, not that
We
I
used to
can.
go to Air Force, Confederate Air Force
Not that I
dinners.
can know, but back when we were training in Germany, we would fly under high tension wires, things like that, because you'd be hovering. You're just hovering along the trees. You know, you're not flying at altitude or anything. And we've flown under high tension wires and stuff, but that was just in training.
And in a combat situation, what's the lowest you got? You can the combat situation, Vietnam wise. How low did you think you ever got?
Oh, we got 1 foot above the. I mean, we flew right on the trees with our Cobras, so we were 1 or 2 feet, and that's why we had to be careful when we fired rockets, because you know we didn't want them to go off of us, and we didn't want them to go off too close to the slicks that we were supporting, you know, and shoot them down.
Well,
yeah, we set our gun up right on the trees.
I mean, I can't even imagine that. A Cobra gun pilot is insane. If you don't have anything else, I think we've covered it here. I'm gonna link a note to Colonel Reader's book. I'll share some of the photos and make sure I'm not missing anything. Talking about going how fast will the Cobras go? They didn't have a question.
Well, the Cobras actually had a V&E. It's a velocity not to exceed of 190 knots, 220 mile an hour. But you could only do that. You couldn't have rocket pods on it. You had to be in a clean configuration. And we never got up to that fast. We flew between probably 120 and 150 mile an hour.
Yeah, still. All right, gentlemen. I think we've gotten it pretty good. We're here almost at a hour and a half. We're gonna close it out, and Mr. Woody, I want to thank you for taking time to be the first pilot to come on and speak to us. And if maybe here in a few weeks or a month or so, if you wouldn't mind, we start talking about Vietnam Cobra pilots again, we'd love to have you back on.
Oh, you bet. I'd be more than happy to. Thank you for inviting me. If anybody has any questions, they can text you or email you, and you can get a hold of me. No problem.
Absolutely. I'll get them to you, and I'm sure I'll be getting you some comments and everything when people start messaging and everything. Matter of fact, everybody's always saying thank you for your service and enjoy it and all that. So I'll get back to you, but we're gonna go ahead and close it out for today, guys. Again, thank y'all for joining me and Mr. Woody. It's been a great day. I'm glad y'all got to enjoy. Got to ask some questions. And we'll get Mr. Woody back on again. Mr. Woody, I'll get you. We can just close it out right here, and I'll touch base with you in a little while as well.
Okay. Great. Sounds good.
The lead studio, and I'm about to end the broadcast. So, guys, I'll see you later. Mr. Woody, I'll talk to you in a bit.
Okay, thanks, bud. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you guys.